Good evening, everyone. Welcome to this BSB webinar. My name's Ewan MacLeod. I'm the Director of Strategy, Policy and Insights. So by way of introduction to the session, I'll just say thank you again for joining this webinar on the latest first-tier complaints, rules and arrangements. We published the rules in February this year, so we've had a 4-month introductory period for people to familiarize themselves with the new rules, and they formally come into effect on the 15th of June. So today we're going to give an overview of the new first-tier complaints rules, including why the changes were made. We'll give an overview of the new data collection requirements. We'll highlight where additional guidance is available. And as I said, we'll have a question and answer session at the end. So my colleague Amit Arakan, who's the policy lead on our first-tier complaints work, will provide the main presentation. And then Faisal Hussain, who's one of our policy managers, will then chair the Q&A session. We also have Sim Foss and Cerise Goodhead from our comms team who are assisting us in the background. So without further ado, I will hand you over to Amit, who will go through his presentation.
Thank you, Ewan. So as Ewan mentioned, firstly, we are going to talk about the context. So this is about why we made the latest changes to our first-tier complaints rules. As you might be aware, the last time the rules were implemented or added to the BSB Handbook were around 2016, when the Legal Services Board published their first-tier complaints requirements. In 2023, the LSB decided to update those requirements, which set out the arrangements that legal services regulators must have in their regulatory rules for how complaints are handled by legal service providers. And in that consultation, they set out significant or step change requirements on how client complaints are handled, but also produced a new policy statement to regulators. And the policy statement requires regulators such as ourselves, the BSB, SRA, etc., have greater oversight on how complaints are handled within their regulated communities, and to take action where certain issues are discovered through that analysis of first-tier complaints and second-tier complaints across their sector. The LSB concluded their consultation process and published their final Section 112 requirements, so the Section 112 is the Legal Services Act, and their final policy statement in May 2024. And it then gave regulators 18 months to implement those proposals. In turn, the way we implemented it is we carried out our own consultation, a full public consultation on what kind of support the profession might need with the new requirements. But we also look to see how we can fulfill the new requirements in the policy statement that the LSB set out for us, specifically using data intelligence from the first and second tier processes, i.e. direct complaints to barristers and chambers and complaints that escalate to legal ombudsman, and to use that data set to identify certain issues, broad themes about how clients' complaints are handled, whether they're satisfied with outcomes, etc. And in our consultation, we suggested options for how we collect that data. So we came up with a number of options, including requiring barristers or chambers to submit data to the BSB on an annual basis or through ATP. And following the full consultation process, we published our response document in November 2025. We basically set out that we would update the current guidance documents on first-tier complaints, provide additional support materials to the profession, but also introduce a new first-tier complaints data requirement, where it will be the responsibility of chambers and BSB entities to collect and submit data on behalf of their members and barristers on an annual basis. That, just to reassure everyone, even though the rules go into effect on the 15th of June this year, we are giving the profession at least another year to collect that data to finish building their systems. We don't have a complete date, but we're going to be, the date will be not within the ATP process, but a different time period. So chambers and clerks and entities are not sort of having to deal with that during the ATP process. We will continue to monitor the impacts of the changes, and we have committed to evaluate the full changes in about 2 years' time. So that's the context out the way. I'm just now going to give you an actual overview of what the new rules are, some of the key changes that you should consider, and an overview of what the data collection arrangements actually require you to do and what additional support and guidance you are going to get from us on that aspect. So firstly, in terms of the actual complaints handling rules, i.e. the rules that apply to you in how you deal with client complaints, there are new and updated rules on how the bar handles individual client complaints and requirements on how clients are informed of their complaints rights, in addition to an increased focus on accessibility and tailored support for individual client needs. For example, those who might have a disability or other accessibility requirements. There is improved clarity in the rules as well. So we are very clear about what type of clients the rules apply to, and we've reflected that with updated definitions in the BSB Handbook, which I'll go through very shortly. And as I mentioned, the updates in the BSB Handbook that we published in February, and which is going to be updated in the BSB Handbook itself on the 15th of June, transposes the LSB requirements directly. But we have added some flexibility, or where there is flexibility, we've made that clear in our updated code guidance on first aid complaints. So one of the big changes is the scope of the rules. And this is one of the key things in the section 112 requirements from the LSB. The idea is, or the rules require that clients who are individuals, micro enterprises, so this is the EU definition, which is set out in our definition as well. Clubs and organizations of a certain size, again, that's set out in our definitions and guidance. Trustees of small trusts, personal representatives or beneficiaries of estates will have to have their complaints information shared with them, and the way you handle complaints must be in accordance with the updated rules. We've also updated the definitions of complaints and first aid complaints, so we've directly transposed the LSB's requirements. For example, what we say is there is some definition around how you apply the definitions. So, for example, how you treat vexatious or frivolous complaints, there is some additional guidance on that. So even though we have a definition, there is some discretion on how you apply that to your individual clients, because the definition is a bit wider than the previous definitions. In this slide, I'm just going to flag where the rules actually sit. So in the handbook, we've updated the outcomes on outcomes 26 and 27, and they basically talk about ensuring that you have a fair and accessible complaints handling process, which allows prompt and fair resolution of complaints. The new and updated complaints rules sit under rules C99 to C109, which is part 2 of the BSB Handbook. And this sets out certain requirements, such as at RC99A, which is a new provision which explains that you must establish and maintain complaints handling procedures, which, for example, is prominent and accessible to clients, sets out steps of client complaints resolution, sets out how complaints will be handled, that it must be communicated in formats tailored to each client's information needs, that it must be periodically reviewed, etc. And secondly, there is a key update in RC99B, which again is about ensuring that clients have information at instruction. So when you are instructed, when a client instructs you or your chambers, etc., that they are given the complaints information at that point and at the conclusion of the matter, which is a new requirement set up from the LSB. And this must be in writing or in tailored formats. Additionally, the client must be informed if a complaint is made or if the information is asked for during the case. But there is, I know that a lot of stakeholders, when we had a consultation and other discussions, that was not always appropriate to provide information to clients 2 or 3 times during the life of a case, especially for short cases or short court appearances. And we've noted that, but there is discretion in that requirement. Both the LSB guidance and our guidance is clear. We provide scenarios where it may be sufficient to only provide this information once, or where the instructor solicitors may provide that information on your behalf or your chamber's behalf to the client. But there must be, so in those circumstances, there must be sort of positive confirmation from the solicitor that they are going to send that information to the client on your behalf. Again, where you have large volumes of instructions from a firm, a law firm or solicitor, it's sufficient to have regular confirmation rather than confirmation on each individual case. And I know this is quite important because of the nature of the bar. The key, I think, with the discretion is that the client is made sufficiently aware of their rights, your processes, and that they may be able to take the matter to LEO if their case falls within their jurisdiction. And then secondly, finally, there's a new and updated requirement on how barristers and chambers and entities respond to and resolve complaints. So at RC 104 of the handbook, or the actual rules, we say that if a complaint is made, it needs to be acknowledged promptly, that the details and contact information of the person dealing with the complaint is provided, that there are dates and timelines provided on the resolution of the complaint. So that needs to be quite specific. There's a requirement to give regular updates to the client on the progress of the complaints, and other sort of requirements around requiring you to use plain and appropriate language for the complaint, and then to discuss options with the client if they're dissatisfied with the outcome of the complaint. And finally, on the actual complaints handling requirements, we have updated our requirements on chambers and BSB entities, specifically sort of set up committees or heads of legal practices or others who deal with regular reviews of complaints. We've updated it again because the LSB has required additional internal reviews of complaints data by the provider. So that requires not just a high-level review, but it requires reviews to look at trends, issues, risks, and systematic issues with your complaints handling and the outcomes of your complaints. And secondly, that measures are implemented to identify those issues or risk or sort of trends. These could include training, for example, or training requirements for members or barristers or tenants, etc. Secondly, as I mentioned, there is a new requirement for data collection and submission to the BSB. So this is one of the key changes that we consulted on. And to support that, both that data submission and also the internal reviews, we've also added a new requirement where barristers or staff in entities, so barristers in chambers or staff in entities, to inform their organisation of any complaints which their chambers or entity might not be aware of. And I know this can happen because barristers might choose to use independent resolution schemes to deal with their first-tier complaints rather than getting their chambers to deal with it. But the requirement is if that's the case and the work relates to that work in those instructions stemming from those chambers, i.e., solicitors instructed those chambers and the work came to you as a barrister, you'd need to ensure that your chambers or BSB entities are aware of that complaint so that they can fulfill the requirement to carry out the internal reviews, but also to submit the data on your behalf or the barrister's behalf on an annual basis. That's the sort of overview of the rules and the details. I'm going to now focus a bit more on the FCT data collection requirements, how it's going to work, what kind of data is required, sort of timings and next steps, and the support we're going to provide, because I know this is a new requirement for us, our sort of regulated community, and we're here to support you throughout the process as much as possible. So just to give you some context on that specific rule, this, as I mentioned earlier on, it comes as a requirement from the new LSB framework. So as I mentioned, the LSB require regulators, including the BSB, to use data at the first tier level and also second tier level. So data from Leo on complaints they deal with. And the aim that we are trying to achieve is that we have the best possible complaint system for clients within the bar. Secondly, it's to help us the sort of wider complaints trends, wider risks, issues. It's not just about identifying individuals, but it's for us to understand what's going on across the regulated community and to be able to sort of work with the profession and stakeholders to address those issues. Finally, even though we haven't collected first-year complaints data from the bar, most of the other legal service regulators already do so or have been doing so for a while, so that aligns us with the others as well. So the idea is, once we do collect the data in about a year's time, and we take some time to analyze it, we would work with, if needed, with individual chambers or with certain stakeholders or groups to share our findings and work together to address those issues. Because really it's all about encouraging early resolution of complaints, reducing the need for escalation, which reduces costs both for you, but also ensure that clients have a good service with your complaints process in itself. So how is it going to work? We published a new BSB data policy statement, and this is a regulatory arrangement. So it builds on the rule that I just mentioned about the requirement to collect and submit data to the BSB on a regular basis. Following the consultation process, most of stakeholders preferred that chambers and BSB entities submit the data on behalf of their barristers or staff that are associated with those chambers. If there is a sole practitioner, they would need to submit it on their behalf. And there will be new forms on MyBar. Again, we consulted quite extensively on the options, and most people preferred MyBar. So we're designing a new system there where clerks or other admin staff or someone that is nominated to form that specific organization will have an account and be able to submit the data once every year rather than regular updates. We also set out and consulted on actually what data should be collected and submitted to the BSB. It will include details of the barrister, so you will need to put down, or the clerks or chambers or entity will need to put down who the complaint was made against. We don't want client details, but just the barrister details, and then details about the actual complaint. So what was the complaint about? What area of law was it? Any basic case information, for example, was the case concluded or is it ongoing? And any sort of outcome information. So these are for closed complaints. So you would submit the data for not ongoing complaints, but those that have concluded, and you would submit whether the complaint was resolved to the client's satisfaction, or whether it's, if you know, it was escalated, if that's something you're aware of, or they weren't happy with the outcome, etc. As I mentioned, this will be one exercise, so it's not going to be one exercise every year, so it's not going to be throughout the year. You will be able to log in through a set periods, or chambers will be able to log in, submit all that data in one go, and that will be it for each year. As I mentioned, we are going to be avoiding ATP reporting periods. Again, that was one of the key things that stakeholders mentioned, so we've listened to that aspect. Now, how will we actually use that data? So once we've received the data, we'll take us, we'll analyze it, and based on that analysis, we're going to be publishing annual aggregated reports. We're not going to identify any individuals or chambers or entities in those reports. It's basically going to identify broad themes and trends. For example, how many complaints there were in certain areas of law, generally were clients satisfied with the complaints handling process, and other sort of high-level themes that we identify. Secondly, the data will eventually help us to meet LSB's expectations in the policy statement that they set to us. So specifically identifying individuals or chambers with issues or weaknesses in their complaints handling process. Just to note there, we're not going to look at individual complaints, but it's actually the systemic basis of whether there is an issue or there are issues with the whole complaints handling process for certain chambers or entity. It will require us to also identify individuals with disproportionately high levels of complaints and disproportionately high levels of complaints that are prematurely escalated to LEO by clients. So that's going to be one of the key things we're going to be looking out for. And I say it's going to inform our overall regulatory approach and supervision work, so both at the individual and profession-wide level. So our supervision team, for example, will then work with chambers to help them identify and resolve the issues. Really, our aim is to work with the profession to improve outcomes both for clients and for practitioners, because we think encouraging early resolution and dealing with issues early on will be beneficial for both sides. Thank you. And this is the bit around support, and I sort of mentioned that we're very keen to provide as much support as possible, and we have already done quite a bit. So we've updated the code guidance to set out a lot more on what all these new requirements mean. where there's a lot of discretion, we've updated the sort of templates, complaints handling documents, or client care letters that will go out. In the actual data collection system, the systems are being developed, but we're very keen to test this with our key partners and stakeholders. So once we have a prototype ready, we'll get them to test it with us, give their feedback to make sure it's as easy and quick to use as possible. We don't want to burden chambers and entities unnecessarily. We are also publishing on the 15th of June, so a new sort of data collection note, which will accompany our policy statement. So this basically just gives some practical information on what kind of data we're looking for example, what the categories of areas of law, where you have free text options, etc., to help you with the gathering of your data, or chambers with their gathering of data. We're also going to produce a FAQ document or section on our website just to help with sort of common questions we've received about the overall arrangements and where flexibility is and what kind of flexibility you have, etc. We are going to continue ongoing engagement more widely, so we'll, as I said, test the system, but we're also going to produce further user guides on how to use the new MyBar system. So there'll be additional guides there. And we're going to do all of that well ahead of the first data collection exercise. We want the profession to be confident on how to use the system before it's launched. Right. So as a final note from me, as I mentioned, once the rules do go into effect on the 15th of June, we are going to be updating the handbook, the BSB Handbook, on our website. As you might have seen, we published it separately on the 15th of June because we didn't want it to go live then, because we want to give the profession around 4 months to prepare, sort of familiarize themselves with the rules. We'll continue to engage with partners and stakeholders post the 15th of June and throughout the year as we develop our user guides, our data collection systems, etc. So we're not done, we're not finished with this. And finally, as I sort of said, we will continue to monitor the impact of the rules, and we will carry out an evaluation in 2 years' time to understand the sort of cost, benefits, etc., where feasible as much as possible. Thank you. I hope you found that useful.
I think we'll bring this session to an end. We had some really good questions, so thank you everyone for attending. As we said, we'll share the recording and the slides and the other things that we've discussed shortly. And we'll follow up with those people who asked more specific questions in the chat. I'll just finish with a plug for our next webinar, if I may, which is on our new AI guidance. So do join us for that on the 16th of July at the same time. That promises to be a really interesting discussion. But for now, I'll just say thank you to Ahmet and Faisal for their contributions tonight. I hope it was useful for everyone. And as we say, if you have any more questions after this, then do get in touch, and we're here to help. So thank you very much, everyone. And I'll bring this webinar to a close now.